We've learned about the first law of thermodynamics, and we've learned about it's all about energy conservation, that the energy is not destroyed or created, it's just transferred from different types to the other or different places. In this video, we are going to learn about heat and work as two ways of transferring the energy. So, if you think about the example of the enclosed container with gases that we said it has different types of energies. We have movement of the atoms, the movement of the electron, the nuclear energy, and all those kind of energy inside that. It is really hard and almost impossible to determine the total amount of energy in the universe or in that system. Okay, so we cannot find E, we cannot find the exact amount of energy, but we can find the difference in energy. We can determine the delta E, right? So we can find the difference in energy as delta E, and we can talk about that. So and we've learned about, if you're talking about something that is the part which is our interest, our area of interest, that is called system. So the delta E of the system is equal to the exact amount of the delta E of the energy change of the surrounding with a different sign. Okay, so we had that in the previous video. So now let's focus on the change in the energy of the system. So there are two ways that energy can leave a system, either through heat or work. Okay, so what is heat? Heat is the transfer of thermal energy. So when you have a transfer of thermal energy, that's heat, and work is the application of force through a distance. We talked about this. Okay, these are two ways that we can lose or gain energy by the system. Okay, so therefore the first law of the thermodynamics looks like this. So we said the energy is constant, we just have a change in energy. So, and we just said that there are two ways that we can have an energy transfer through the system. So which means the change in the energy, delta E, is work plus heat. Okay, so the W is work and Q is heat. So if you noticed, we write Q and W with lowercase letters, and we talked about that because they are not state function, and energy is a state function, and we write it with capital E. If you want to learn more about why work and heat are not state function and energy is, and why we have these two as not state function but the sum is state function, you can go and study more on your textbook, but that is not something that I'm going to test you on the exam. So the thing that you have to know is you have to memorize this formula, that the sum of work and heat is delta E. Okay, so something that might be a little bit confusing sometimes, to stick it in the mind, is to find the sign of the heat and work. Okay, so if you think about it as the energy standpoint, so think about heat. So when the system is losing thermal energy, losing the heat, so it's losing the heat, so the sign of the heat is negative. So the sign of the heat is negative when system loses thermal energy. The sign of the heat is positive when the system gains thermal energy. Okay, so you're gaining energy, it's positive, you have increase in energy, so it's positive, the change is positive. You're losing energy, so you're losing thermal energy, so the change is negative, you're going down in energy, you're losing it. Okay, so when the system loses thermal energy, the sign of the heat is negative. When the system is gaining the energy, so the new state, the final state, is higher than the initial state, so the change is positive. Okay, so for heat, negative, system loses thermal energy, positive, system gains thermal energy. Work, so when you're doing work, you spend energy, you lose energy, right? So the change is negative, so the work is negative when work done by the system. The work is positive when the surrounding is doing work on the system, and therefore the system is gaining energy. Okay, so the work done by the surrounding on the system. So when the work is done on the system or by the surrounding on the system, the work is positive. When the work is done by the system, it's negative. So there is another way, I don't know if it's appropriate to tell you or not, but something that I came up and that helped me to memorize it with the work. So I think about the system is lazy, and if it wants to do the job and say, I have to do this job, I have to do this work, so it doesn't like it, so that's negative. So when the work is done by the system, which it doesn't like it, that's negative because it doesn't like it. When the work is done by something else, which is called surrounding on the system, it is positive. Well, it's laid back, and the system likes the work to be done by something else, which is surrounding, so it's good for the system, and that's positive. Okay, that's just a code. Okay, so that's code for the work. The heat, I think it's easy. So when it's gaining the thermal energy, it's increasing energy, so the final state is higher than the initial state, so it is positive. When it's losing the thermal energy, so the final state is lower than the initial state, so it's negative. So that might be easier to memorize. But anyway, so by these two changes you can find the delta E. And if you're studying the system, so the Q of the system and the work of the system, so the delta E of the system is can be found. Sometimes the system is closed and you cannot study the inside the system, but you can find the change of the energy of the surrounding. And we've learned about this equation, that the amount of the change of energy of the surrounding is equal to the change of the energy of the system with a different sign. Okay, so delta E of the system equals negative delta E of the surrounding. Okay, now let's have some practice to see if we get this concept or not. Which best describe the following statement in terms of heat and work? So the sweat evaporates on the skin, cooling the body. Okay, so in this example, the sweat is the system. So which one is right? So there is no work on here, it's just evaporation. So the sweat, which is the system, is gaining some energy to evaporate. Okay, so when the system is gaining the energy, so gaining the thermal energy in order to evaporate, so the heat sign should be positive, so therefore it's A. Remember, the sweat is the system. Your skin or the face is not the system. You might feel that when the sweat on your face is evaporating, you feel cooler. So you might think that you lost energy, and it's negative because it's cooler. There's a lower, it decreases the temperature. But in that case, your face that feel the temperature is the surrounding. The system is the sweat. The sweat gain the energy from your face to evaporate. So the system is gaining the energy, so the heat sign is positive. So next one, which best describes the following statement in terms of heat and work? Gas in a car's cylinder expands, pushing the piston up. So if you think about how the engine of your car works, the gas goes into the cylinder in here in the picture and it expands. Okay, we're not talking about how, just think about the expansion. Okay, so the gas expands and move this piston up. Okay, so the gas is the system. Which one is right? So we are talking about the expansion. It's a work, so it's just moving, so it's a work. So which one is doing the work, the system or the surrounding? the system is pushing up the piston, so the system is, which is the gas, is doing the work. So we said that the system doesn't like to do the work, so if it does, it's negative. Okay, so the system is doing the work, so the work sign is negative, therefore it's D. Okay, so the last one, certain process released 25.5 kilojoule of heat. So it always, when you're dealing with these type of questions, it's better to write down a summary of the given information. So as you read the question, just write down in mathematics what information is given. So the process released this amount of kilojoule of heat. Okay, so you know heat is Q. The amount of heat is 25.5 kilojoule. What about the sign of the heat? Is it positive or negative? So it says the process released the energy, right? So it seems like the system is losing the energy, so it's released. So when you lose the energy, what is the sign for the Q? Because the final state is lower than the initial, so it's negative, right? So Q is negative 25.5 kilojoule. Okay, so he released this amount of heat to the surroundings and did 500 joule of work. Okay, so work, the amount of work is 500 joule. What about the sign? So it says the certain process released the heat and did the work. So it seems like the system did the work, and we said that if system wants to do a work, it doesn't like it, so the sign is negative. Okay, so the work is negative 500 joules. What is the delta E for the process? Okay, so we know delta E is Q plus W, or W plus Q, doesn't matter. So can we add these two together with these units that they have? No, because one of them is in joules and one of them is in kilojoule, right? So we have to go to one unit. We can either convert this one to joule and add it, or convert the joule to kilojoule. It doesn't matter, but in the end, both of them should have the same unit. And since you see all of the numbers, all of the answers, options are in kilojoule, so it's better to make both of them to kilojoule and then add them together. Okay, so Q is already in kilojoule, work is in joules, so I have to convert this to kilojoule. So I don't want joule, I want kilojoule. I know 1 kilo, so 1 goes to the prefix and the definition of the prefix goes to the base unit. So 1 kilo is 10 to the third joule, right? So I can cancel joule with joule, I end up with kilojoule. So I have negative 0.500 kilojoules. Okay, so now we can add these two quantities together because both of them have the same units. Okay, so Q is negative 25.5 kilojoules plus work is negative 0.500 kilojoule. So it's negative and negative, so you add them with a negative sign, and that is 26.5 kilojoules. So which one? Option D. Oh no, not D. So let me erase that. The sign of the energy is negative, right? So these are easy mistakes that you're going to lose points in the exam. So be careful. Do not be like me. Okay. So it's negative 26. It's negative 26. So option C. Okay. So in this video, we've learned about how energy is going to be transferred from the system, and it's in two ways, as heat or energy. And in the next video, we are going to talk about each of these two, how to do calculation for finding the heat and how to do calculation to find the work.